The HX Collective explores the human experience through three main channels of life: work, relationships, and self. With raw, authentic conversations, the podcast investigates how challenges can become powerful teachers, leading to personal growth and deeper connections. Rooted in humanity-centered design, each episode reflects a commitment to doing good and doing well, featuring diverse voices and generational perspectives. Expect gripping stories of struggle and success, with thought-provoking discussions and concrete tools and tactics that encourage you to rethink your relationship with distress, helping you to establish your full human experience. This is the HX Collective channel. Hello, friends, and welcome to the next episode of the HX Collective podcast. Now, I recognize I get pretty excited every time I'm introducing a guest, but today is such a special conversation for multiple reasons. You are going to hear again from our HX ally, Suzanne Massel. Suzanne recently was introduced to our audience around her perspective of human flourishing through the lenses of work, relationships, and self. And today, Suzanne and I are going to take a much deeper dive into the life skill, also known as networking. Now, in addition to Suzanne's storied background, having combined a wide range of experiences as a lawyer and litigator, having worked in-house as in-house counsel, and now working in the space of coaching and mentoring and consulting, she also brings a wealth of life experience as a mother of adult children, as a cancer survivor, and someone who understands the power of networking and what networks can mean as we unite in our mission to elevate human flourishing. So, Suzanne, welcome back for our next conversation. I could not be more excited for us to get to pick up where we left off. How are you?
Fine. I'm so thrilled to be here. I always enjoy speaking with you. Thank you for having me back, Deb.
Well, and knowing that this particular episode is going to publish a little bit later, we should probably address the elephant in the room and why we look like twinsies in our reds. So for those who just to know, a lot of podcasts are recorded, they go into post-production, and then we come back and we publish them. But today is the day before Valentine's Day. So Suzanne and I are repping love to the ultimate form of human flourishing, right? I mean,
it is. Exactly. Why not?
Exactly. Okay, so let's dig in. I mean, this whole subject of networking is so near and dear to your heart. But before we dig into that, just if we can give just a little bit of the context. I know that, people may not have heard your full background, and I gave it a real high-level introduction, but if you could just ground us in the context in which you're coming to this conversation today, and then tell us a little bit about your light bulb moment when you started to see this subject of networking through the lens of human flourishing. But first, your background.
Absolutely. So my background is, I'm Suzanne Massel. I am a lawyer, but I practiced for 33 years in different contexts as a litigation partner, in-house counsel in a variety of size companies, took on some HR responsibilities in several companies as well, and then pivoted most recently to coaching. As you mentioned, sort of a health issue, getting cancer and recovering from it was a moment to say, what do I really want to do for the next chapter of my career? And I decided to double down on something that's been a thread throughout my entire career, which is I wasn't an official coach, but coaching people, supporting people, collaborating, mentoring. And now I am a certified coach, and I work with attorneys, executives, professionals at all levels who are trying to either gain clarity about their next step, trying to grow into a role, elevate their leadership, or transition into a new role.
Yeah.
So, and I'm also a mother. I have 2 Gen Z kids, almost 22 and almost 24. So I see we'll be spending a lot of time on networking, but I see the power of networking, not just through my own experience, but I get to see it again, how it works through the eyes of people navigating the professional world.
Well, Suzanne, before we dig into the actual subject of our conversation today, I just want to validate that coming to this moment in time and seeing life through all the different lenses in which you've engaged, that through line of human flourishing really is at the forefront. And knowing how important relationships are, knowing how we may have a very limited view of what networking is. In fact, we often think of it as the going to the cocktail party, you don't know everybody, backslapping, eating chicken, sitting at tables. And so I'm hoping you can give us maybe as a starting point, when we even say the word networking, kind of how do we want to put our arms around this and kind of what was your, sort of epiphany that this was an important life skill and a human flourishing skill?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I'm smiling about the backslapping and chicken because that's exactly how I felt about it. I could talk about networking a lot, and for the exact reason you raised, I had an epiphany of a complete aversion to networking because of my perception, an experience where someone, a mentor, sort of illuminated what it really was, putting into play what she talked about and finding enormous success. And I don't mean just career success, I mean personal success in terms of forming relationships, in terms of creating opportunity. So I don't mean monetarily necessarily, but in terms of my life. So I think the light bulb moment is what you sort of asked for. When I was a attorney and became a partner, they said, "Congratulations, you're now a partner. Go bring in business." And I was horrified because I was in a profession like many individual contributors are, where you're focused on the details of what you do and not the other things, whether it's leadership or networking and business development. And I thought exactly what you just said. I thought it was, I don't play golf. I don't stand around and glad hand. I'm not in those days, 20 plus years ago, mostly men. It's obviously changed. I didn't feel that I had sort of the same stature as a lot of the men in the room. And it was terrifying. Then I met a woman, it was through a networking group, who said to me, and this was a light bulb moment, she said, "It's not glad handing. It's not the sort of what I imagine the cheesy salesperson saying, 'When are you going to send me a case?'" She said, "It's really about just making connections with people, asking questions, remembering things about them, adding value, sharing things with them." And I thought, wait a minute, that's just what we do as people.
Yeah.
That's not networking. And she said, "No, no, no. It's the exact same you do in life, and with other people who are not necessarily business contacts." And once I heard that, Deb, it was like a seismic shift, and I realized that I didn't have to follow the model, the guy at the golf course. I could network. In my case, I had young children, so an example that was relevant to me was in school events. I could meet people, tell them what I did, get introductions. I could network in sports events for my children, and certainly in business events as well. And just to sort of land the plane, I realized that once the pressure of trying to be something I didn't think I was removed, and I could be myself, that's when, it was off to the races with networking for me.
I love it. Well, it's such an important thing for our audience to recognize that when we start to think about networking through the lens of connection and relationship building and being aware in whatever the context in which we're operating, it means there's possibility. And one of the things you had shared with me, and when we talk about the mission of the HX Collective, our mission is to elevate human flourishing. And when you became an ally in our last conversations really brought to light why this conversation of human experience or human connection, it's not an option. And it's not that we can be successful in any aspect of our life absent it. But talk about what it means to have networking and why do you think networking really at its core is about human connection?
At its core, it's about connection because people, and I'm going to use the example of do business. People do business with people they trust, but let's expand it because networking is so valuable, whether you're actually working in the workforce and trying to generate business, whether you're at the end of your career and you're trying to network to figure out what's next, whether you're at the beginning of your career or whether you don't have a formal career at all, but you're trying to get inspiration and passion or get involved in things. So, at its core, networking is essential to community. we're all better in community. We can't come up with ideas or opportunities as well individually as we can with others. So I think I think I answer your question with
Yeah.
why is it so important? Because I think it's critical to everything we do. But the word networking sounds like it's a transaction. And I would say, let's take away, I wish I could rebrand it and say, let's not use that word. Let's use the word making connections. And
Yeah.
once we use a different word, it feels organic and it feels more natural.
It does. Well, there's two things that you just said that I think are important for our listeners in that when we start to think about this in the spirit of making connections and not in that formal networking or almost in that business sense, it just widens it for accessibility for all of us. And as you said, that in making connections, it doesn't mean one is in a formal career. I love that you're talking about in life stages or just that sense of community, which is another word that you used, making connections, making community is such a piece of this, and nobody flourishes as a solo sport. One of my favorite things that you introduced to me is that there are some mnemonics that we can look at. And I love that you kind of highlight, that there's actually a way of thinking about authentic networking through the lens of the three C's. Share with us
Yes.
what you think about your rubric for making connections that can then produce that sense of community and those favorable outcomes. What are the three C's?
The three C's are connection, curiosity, and conversation. And so connection is showing interest. I mean, we all know what connection means, but as I think about it in the scope of networking, it's showing interest in what someone else does or what you hope to learn from them. To take a slight detour, when a lot of people think of networking, they think of, let me show you something about myself, let me perform, and maybe not intentionally perform, but that's sort of the understood, I want to show you that I am valuable and credible, and you should give me business or you should do something for me. Strip that away, think about it in the opposite. I want to show interest in you. I want to show curiosity in you. And I'm not saying we're totally selfless. It's a conversation back and forth, which lands on our third C, which is conversation. So show interest, ask some follow-up questions, and have conversation where maybe not in the moment, but after the conversation, if not during, you're adding value. Hey, you're looking, it doesn't have to be even business. Hey, you're looking to plan a trip to, Florida. I've got some great places to go. You have a child that needs a specialist. I know someone that can help them with that. And this forms the foundation of trust. And when people trust and feel good, all sorts of things can happen in that relationship, including business development. And, after I came, I sort of use the three C's because it works for me. I listened to this podcast, and a Harvard professor named Allison Wood has a different mnemonic, but it's similar. And I'll share it briefly. She teaches a course to MBA students about how conversation is skill building. And her mnemonic is talk, which is come up with interesting topics. So, along the lines of connection, ask really good questions, show a little, L is levity, show a little bit of humor, smile, and kindness, be kind and think about the other person. So you pick your mnemonic. They both sort of align with what we think of in terms of connection versus just transactional networking.
Well, I want to highlight, first of all, you've got the right podcast. I have never met a mnemonic that I do not love. I love to name things. I like to report things. I like to put things in lists. This is you're speaking my language. And the fact that you downloaded me, in addition to your three C's, now I have talk.
Yeah. Well,
Value that all the way around.
I'm stealing hers, but I like it. I like it.
And I think it's worth amplifying for sure. What I think is so curious though, in whether you're looking at connection, curiosity, conversation, or topics, ask, levity, and kindness. Did I get that?
You've got a perfect.
Here's the thing. They're all very generous and generative. And I think that's something to pay attention to because you said earlier, sometimes we get into this mindset that we have to be performative or it's like we're doing an audition or it's all about bringing a spotlight and a showcasing to us. That's what can make it feel high pressure. I think that's what can make it feel icky. But what you're describing is something that is very much about other centeredness. It's very much about audience engagement. It's really about planting the seeds that feel more like Santa Claus and less like salespersons. So I think that's an important way of maybe jumping up and saying, well, think about all the places and how networking could be available. Because I know there are people listening to our podcast that may be in that early stage of their careers, or maybe they're college students getting ready to step into their careers. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how it can be helpful kind of in the early stage. And then we'll work into some of the other building blocks, once you've landed a job, how to grow on a role and so forth. But for those that are kind of in the early bird stage of their life and of their careers, or becoming, full-time parents, why is networking valuable to the early stage networker?
This is where I get really excited because I think it is one of the greatest accelerators of early career professionals. And acceleration to what? Acceleration to learning more about what interests them. It doesn't have to be acceleration to a job. Acceleration in understanding more about what kind of industries appeal to them, or perhaps accelerating their job search. So it's not just the end game of a job search. And more specifically, informational interviews. So I in it I, at the beginning I mentioned I work with people in all stages of their careers. I do have many clients who are the emerging professionals. And I don't think networking is really taught in college or any sort of professional school to the extent that it should be. Why is it valuable? Informational interviews, which I define as reaching out to somebody who has something that interests you or that you could learn from. So, for example, if you're a recent college graduate and you think, I don't know, maybe I want to go into marketing, maybe I want to go into client service, maybe I really like operations, I'm not sure. People love it when someone reaches out and say, "Hey, I see you're in an operations role. Do you have 15 minutes to talk with me and share with me a little bit more about what you do?" And why is that sort of magic? Because you're not asking for a job. You're not asking for them to do anything other than share their experience. And often that forms a warm connection where the person you've asked to speak to now, hopefully, if you did a good job and prepared well, remembers you, might offer to introduce you to someone else. And it sort of revs up sort of the silent, or what's the word? The behind the scenes networking, where now I've told, for example, let's say I'm networking with you, Deb. Now you might remember me and tell someone else and tell someone else. So you really leverage the power of information, connections, and just I don't know if reflection is the right word, but yeah, it is reflection, reflecting on what really excites you through that conversation. And if you rinse and repeat that and speak to enough people in different careers or specific roles within the career path you're already on, it's unbelievable how much you can learn and how that will help lead to a good spot.
I'm lucky. I'm at the life stage now where I'm now receiving the requests for informational interviews, which that also means you're getting old, Deb Nup. But all that to be said, I can't tell you, not only is it exciting when somebody, values your wisdom and your perspective. I mean, it really taps in your ego. It does give you a sense of like, I am valuable, I am worth. So never underestimate, while it is super valuable for the person who's at that earlier stage of their career seeking and to get the benefit of information and wisdom, I can say, and I'm confident you would agree, it is as valuable to the person giving the information, provided that the person who's engaging is prepared and they've done their homework. They're not wasting that time, but rather you can tell and you do remember them and you do talk about them. And it does create that behind the scenes ripple effect or right.
Looking
It, I
for it.
mean, it really, it creates that, as we think about networking kind of next stage, and we're looking at, all right, I'm in that space right now where maybe networking because I want to grow in a particular way in a role. Are there
Mhm.
things that you have found that are critical? So I'm already in a job, I'm in a role, my career is moving in a good direction, but I want to expand my horizons or expand my capabilities. What are some of the ways that again, making connections and networking can be a real benefit to people who might embrace it?
That great question. I think about it in, well, right now 3 ways, but there's probably more. This is what comes to mind. One is you're in a role and you're just trying to expand your presence, expand your influence, expand your visibility for opportunity in your role. And internal networking, and let's use the word I said before, internal making connections is valuable because it's incredibly, think of any organization, it's very easy to stay within our department. But if you reach across into another department and take someone out for a coffee or have a Zoom coffee chat, that helps you gain visibility within your organization, and opportunities can come your way for collaborating on interesting projects, for doing things even, the employee resource groups are a great way as well to meet people from other departments. So that's sort of to expand who you are.
Yeah.
I find it incredibly powerful when people move into leadership roles because, and I know this is your life's work, and so I'm saying something really to the expert, which you should really be saying this, not me, but how I see it from my vantage point, having both been a leader and been an employee underneath a wide variety of leaders, that the human connection is not just a nice to have, it is an essential foundation for success as a leader. And
Absolutely.
in my career, I'm glad you agree because I have no doubt you would,
It's a non-negotiable. It really is a non-negotiable.
because it creates trust. And
Yeah.
when, even if you have a disagreement, well, let me not get in the weeds. I'll stay big picture for a second. So the connection of a leader, um, particularly in this time of remote work, hybrid work, where water cooler conversations are few and far between, to make the effort and develop the skills to connect with the team, the group, the other groups, is just incredibly invaluable because it fuels a sense of belonging, which fuels innovation, creativity, and drives retention. So even if someone is really an introvert and not leaning into connecting, and we want to be a complete cynic and not kind, it adds to the bottom line. Minimally, it adds to the bottom line with retention. But above that, it creates wonderful community when done well, which creates more creativity. What do you have something to add to that? Because
Well,
you're
no,
the
no, I'm in full agreement. And I often think about, you know, being a lifelong networker, a person who, continually suggests or says, you can never know too many good people. And in particular, as leaders, networking and making connections is invaluable in so many ways because it's such a lonely sport sometimes. And having the capacity to build the continuity or to be around people who may be experiencing things in a space that can be fairly isolating. I've found the higher I've risen in a role, the more valuable it is for me to prioritize making connections. And as a leader, when I'm reaching into my organizations or reaching across with peer groups, fortifying that circumstance for creativity, I couldn't have said it better myself. So I think, as people are listening, I mean, there are the outgrowths of making connections and how essential that is to our human experience. I think one of the biggest places, and I suspect, again, as we are looking ahead, so much uncertainty with the era of AI, so many market conditions and other elements of our world conditions that are creating some volatility right now. Inevitably, people are going to be in transition. People are going to be called to make pivots. And I know so many people that I have mentored or counseled when they find themselves in a surprising space of transition or pivot, how
Yes.
disappointed they are that they haven't kept up with connections, that they haven't kept up with networks. And I'm interested to hear, the word of encouragement is to say, if you are prioritizing the making of connections at the entire arc of your career, better to have that early than be in the space of regret and feeling like you're having to do double time to resurrect contacts or connections or start so fresh. What would you share, both in terms of the word of encouragement? I was going to say the word of warning, but at the same time, how to navigate when you are in a transition or in a pivot.
In the beginning, you said it beautifully. The starting early is so important. And why? Because I can't say it enough. It's not about just a transactional thing. It's about the unknown. Where might this relationship that interests me take me? It might not have anything to do with my profession when I'm 23 or 24. But all of a sudden, when I find myself in my 30s, that person may have moved to a space that I'm interested in, or might, have a dog walker that I need. You just can't underestimate the value of creating your own community that feels good to you. And it's easy to start when you're young. It doesn't, LinkedIn for sure is a necessity, but just the human connection and keeping a list of people following up with ideas. If you create this net now of trust, not just taking, but giving, so making connections, and I found this throughout my career, it is invaluable. And actually, you and I are a amazing story. Well, maybe not so amazing,
I
but
think we're walking
love
examples of this. We are
yeah.
literally the living embodiment of something that happened early that brings us to our present day. Please tell more.
Yes, because it was 10 years ago, and I know that because of a LinkedIn message I sent you, where you came to do leadership training at the law firm where I was a partner. And I was so engrossed in what you were presenting that I thought, I loved you, loved your energy. I love what she's doing. Maybe someday I can move into that professional development space that speaks to me. And I reached out to you, and you were, and so this is a live example of I wasn't asking for a job. I just wanted to learn. And you took the time way back then to have coffee with me, to talk with me. And that was 10 years ago. Flash forward, I see this wonderful sort of post on LinkedIn about what you're building with the HX Collective. And that spoke to me then too. And I reached out on LinkedIn, seeing that my last message had been 10 years ago, and said I'd love to learn more. And so that connection that we had was not transactional. It was born of interest. And now we get to do something fun and creative together as part of what you've built. So for anyone young, middle, old in their career, it's never too early or too late to start leaning in and showing curiosity, asking follow-up questions. But I do want to address the pivoting, because yes, so many people are unintentionally in a space where they're pivoting and some intentionally. And there is no better way to learn about opportunities than tapping into your network. And people can't help unless they know exactly what you're looking for, or generally what you're looking for. I think people who are laid off or in a transition tend to feel a little shame. And I would also want to turn that on its head and say it's normal to feel shame, not shame, but it's normal to feel bad. It's normal to feel perhaps one down for a bit. But then to shift the perspective to everyone knows someone who's been laid off, everyone's been laid, that this is just a normal part of life. And let me tell people what's happened, what I'm looking for. And when you do that, you'd be surprised. I've seen it over and over and over again, how many unexpected doors can open. So
Yeah.
I think to sum it up, own it, just sort of own your networking for not the one dot that you're going for, but for the unknown and the possibilities of what could happen.
Well, it's such an important illustration. And I think there's two things that I've experienced. So I want to step to the 10-year distance
Yeah.
between our connections. I think it's really, really valuable when you have a high quality connection with someone. It doesn't always mean that you have to nurture that every 2 weeks. So it isn't a function of we didn't have an active level of contact or connection for an entire decade, but it is a testimonial that when there is a quality exchange and there is an emotional exchange and a relationship exchange, that rekindling in a single message was super easy for me to absolutely want to jump back in both feet, because I remembered not the details necessarily of what we discussed, but I remember how you made me feel. And it reminds me of that Maya Angelou quote that people may forget what you said, what you did, but they will never, ever forget how you made them feel. And so the kind of networking that Suzanne is describing here is the kind of networking that leaves a mark. It's making a connection that makes a person remember how they felt in your presence. so that in the future state, that rekindling wasn't like, oh, we lost a full decade and where have you been? It was a function of like, now it's just the right moment, the right circumstances in which to reignite. So I think that should give a lot of people hope because a lot of people will say, oh, it's been too long. I can't possibly. No. If you
They
did
won't
high quality, they will remember. They will absolutely remember. And then as it relates to this idea of pivots and transitions, I've had a number of people that have reached out to me and said, can you help me make a connection? Can you? But the people who stand out the most to me are not only the people who are coming to me asking for support, help, advice, counsel. I am always really struck by the end of that exchange when someone says to me, Deb, because I'm doing a lot of networking for my jobs, because I'm looking for new opportunities, is there anything that I can do for you, for your business, for your network? I'm telling you, Suzanne, 10 out of 10. It's like it bowls me over every single time. And I can see you're reacting to this. So I want to hear what it is you see in what I'm saying around that kind of phenomenon, either the distance of time or in that space of that generosity, even when you might be feeling in a space of desperation.
Oh my God, you said so much, so much good stuff. What's coming up for me in both stories about how you make people feel, I think that's the through line. Let's start with what you just said about people coming to you for help, but then offering to help. That is the core of building trust and community and taking networking from the cheesy salesperson to the true community building. And your answer might be, no, not today, but I will let you know. And thank you so much. And it's less important what the answer is. It's more important that someone asked the question. And that makes you feel good. The beginning part about and thank you. I'm glad I made you feel good 10 years ago. And I do think that when I work with anybody, whether it's the emerging professionals or the more seasoned professionals, I do emphasize the absolute necessity of preparation because you don't want to waste anyone's time. And a lot of people think this networking community building communication is really for the extroverts, for the people who love to go out and shake hands and talk back and forth. And I am here to say that actually, yes, it's very easy for extroverts, but it is uniquely positioned for introverts as well. And the reason I say that tied to preparation is this: if you're less comfortable going out there and meeting new people, showing up in a, cocktail party of an event, the preparation can ease some of that pain. What do I mean by that? Maybe look at a guest list and see who might be there, who you can go talk to. Come up in advance with a couple topics that you might want to discuss with someone. Therefore, you don't have to be on the fly. What am I going to discuss? You can be very measured. I tell my children, even, they sort of got this message when they were young. They don't need to hear it from me anymore. I always say you will never be in an uncomfortable social situation ever or professional if you ask a question, because that's your safety net from any sort of awkwardness. Ask someone else about themselves. So preparation for someone who's a little bit less inclined to want to network, preparation of topics, much like Allison Wood said, what are your topics? Prepare in advance. Ask the questions, be curious. And that sort of looping back to what you said originally makes people feel heard and understood and will create a good feeling, which is not intended to be self-serving. It's intended to be genuine, but it does help achieve creating that connection, which can benefit you in the future once you establish that network.
I love it. Suzanne, when I hear you describe that preparation, it reminds me of something my mother used to say to me. She would, when growing up, we were from Texas. And so you have to put this into the Texas realm. She would say,
Yeah.
Debbie, if you want to be popular, you better learn how to use your ears and mouth proportionately. And I thought, that's crazy advice, Pam. Thank you, Pam. Also, I should say this is coming from the person who said it's not done till it's overdone, but that's a different podcast. Uh, but
I,
I can
I,
say to you, the idea of two ears and one mouth used proportionately as a signal of popularity again, should give all of us great pause. And I would say for my introverted brothers and sisters out there, I want you to know when you show an earnestness, you have an interest, you're asking questions of people about themselves, they will impute so much more value and connection and emotion than somebody who might be a bit more extroverted and may come off as a chest beater blowhard. You know, there is a power of having that interest, the sincerity, and asking questions and how it makes another person feel. So I just want to give a shout out for that great advice and helping people recognize that a big part of making connections is having a game plan. It is pre-thinking about a couple of things that you can spur good conversation and power of great questions. So
Yes.
impactful. You know,
Yes.
Suzanne, I love every time we get a chance to talk. And one of
Me
my
too.
favorite things that you've inspired me around, and it's certainly something that I want to continue to be a light force with people who are engaging with this podcast, is you do draw from other experts who have perspectives that, have inspired you, or research that you have done that really
Mhm.
reinforces the power of human flourishing. Are there any other resources or perspectives that you've encountered that you think could make a big difference for people to maybe have a new relationship with this subject of networking in a way that can maybe be useful or activated as a part of this discussion?
The answer is yes, but I want to tee it up for just a second. One of the reasons why I think we're in this sort of watershed moment of why it's almost it is essential, not almost essential. It is essential now. And you and I believe talked about this in our other podcast, but the idea that we're in a time in history right now where we are all being pulled apart and not being pushed together. We're being pulled apart by political discourse, which has, been going on for years and makes it very difficult. We are in more isolation because we don't go to the office as often, which I mentioned earlier, missing that sort of impromptu catch up, impromptu advice, or even for young people, young professionals, how to assert yourself when you need help in a very professional way, when you can sort of read that someone's busy. Those skills are being challenged. COVID obviously put us in a situation of further separation, and AI, which people, I don't even need to say this, it's so obvious, but relying on more and more and more and more. The problem with AI is it's fantastic in getting certain tasks done, but it doesn't replace empathy or trust. It cannot replicate trust, and it cannot replicate sincere communication. So that's sort of my soapbox of why I think we're in this critical moment. But to answer your question, there are two thought leaders who really hit on this topic beautifully. Scott Galloway and Esther Perel say something very differently, but it's the same. They say empathy and communication is a superpower because you can't be successful in business or even in your personal life if you can't influence a room, if you can't pick up on body language, if you can't interject humor at the right time. And those cannot be replicated or replaced by AI. So they both say the antidote to this is talk to strangers, which
Mm,
sounds so odd, but they explain it that it's not the work the room talking to strangers. It's the serendipity that you need to practice when you're in an elevator and there's someone there and you say, hello, how's the weather? Or, how are you? Let's talk about the weather. Or in the line at a coffee shop. And it sounds so silly, but it's those moments of impromptu communication where people who grew up more through COVID and have had less experience with that develop a skill that is essential to combating the excess or the pervasiveness, I should say, of AI. And so I lean heavily on what they say because I believe it, and I don't have any data to prove that they're right, but I know they're right because nobody can survive without effective human connection and communication. So
that's great.
I'm going to say they're right.
Let's do it. Well, I'm going to touch and agree with that for sure. And I will say this, as we wrap up today's conversation, and as you're sort of looking ahead, one of my favorite things about this podcast is we're always looking to give those little nuggets and practical wisdom. And you've been giving it to us throughout the entirety of this conversation. And so some things that I'm hearing, and then I'm going to invite you to say, what else, if I want to get started, or if there's something that I've missed in hearing you say today, like, is there anything else you would add? But I love your 3 C's. So the 3 C's again: connection, curiosity, and conversation, and doing that with that other centeredness sort of in that realm and top of mind. I've heard you think about networking at all seasons. So having these different life stages for which having that human connection is essential to human flourishing. And then you've just given us a whole host of perspectives on really practical things that we can do, whether it's we don't feel necessarily wired for networking or making connection, or we don't necessarily are currently being impacted by circumstances which are taking us further and further away from human beings. And now you're saying, no, we need to get closer and closer, even if it's with that impromptu level of connection with strangers. What are some closing points of advice? What are some key takeaways that you can imagine people could do to have a real meaningful difference in their own human experience by embracing networking as a life skill for making connection?
Oh, wow. Thank you. I think that the closing thoughts really are several. One is continue to remind yourself that it is not a transactional exercise, but it is a life skill that the sooner you start, the more it can benefit you. And when I say more it can benefit you, that's a two-way street. You can support others while they can support you, which grows your network. So starting young. The other thing that I would say is for those that love talking to people and are very at ease with having connections and conversations, great. What would be my takeaway? Think about someone who you'd like to learn from for any aspect of your life and continue to practice it. Expand networking beyond just work and see, as we age, the more and more and more we need community outside of work as well. So for those that love it, maybe take it into a different direction. You love gardening, network with someone about that, or bike riding or travel. For the people that are not so comfortable with it, we did talk about that briefly, but I would say you are uniquely suited to network in a way that's completely authentic to you, because all it takes for those more introverted people is a little bit of preparation. And although we talked about AI as sort of taking communication away, it can be a great thought partner if you say, oh, I'm going to this business event. I need 2 or 3 topics. Here's the event. Here's the type of people that will be there. And maybe that can help generate. And I think my final thought would be that anybody in life and business can succeed, whatever your definition of success might be, better in community than alone. We're biologically wired to survive in community. And so that what we've been talking about today is just a way to sort of shore that foundation up. And I think I said this once to you before, but there's this quote from the founder of LinkedIn. And he said, something like, his name is Reid Hoffman, something like, no matter how brilliant you are or what great ideas you have as a solo member, you will always lose out to a team. And so as a sort of, athlete myself and seeing the value of team connection, I firmly believe, back to the HX collective mission, we all flourish more, whatever your definition of flourishing and success might be, in community, and networking is just a way to help us get there.
I love it. Well, as always, it's such a delight. I can't wait for our next conversation. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. Thank you for being my friend. And thank you for being an ally in the HX Collective. So, friends, if you're listening, I will have Suzanne's contact information. You can find her on LinkedIn and on her website. She's a phenomenal coach. I know people who've worked with her and just sing her praises. So, again, please look her up for the wide range of things that she brings to the table. And thank you for giving us the gift of your wisdom and the encouragement that making connections indeed is about networking. Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you. Love talking to you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for being here. If today's conversation sparked something in you, we hope you'll carry it forward with curiosity, compassion, and courage. Subscribe to the show, Leave a review and share this episode with someone who needs it. Until next time, keep exploring what it means to be fully human.